Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 3 of the Uncast. As always, I'm your host, Jon Panozzo, and for today's episode, I invited Paulus Schoutsen, founder of Home Assistant, and Doug Roberson, CTO of Allterco Robotics, maker of Shelly branded devices. These gents are going to help us learn more about a very important subject, home automation. So, without further ado, Paulus and Doug, welcome to the show. How are you guys?
Great.
Doing good, thank you.
Excellent, excellent. Really happy to have you guys with us today to talk about home automation and why people need to care about it. I think this is a really interesting subject for our community. Paulus, we were just talking before, and you'd mentioned that Home Assistant was one of the first Docker containers that was published for Unraid OS, which I think is awesome, and that you actually maintain that yourself, which is even better. It's really great when the application developer is also the container author and maintainer. That helps a lot from a support perspective. Before we get too much into this, I want to start with brief intros for each of you. Doug, can we start with you?
Sure. I'm the Chief Technology Officer for Allterco Robotics US. Allterco is the manufacturer of Shelly IoT and automation products.
Excellent. And Paulus?
Yeah, I'm the founder of Home Assistant. I started 8 years ago. It's the world's largest open source home automation platform. Last year, the second most active Python project on GitHub. We focus on local control and privacy, and I do this full time with a bunch of other people nowadays.
Excellent. Thank you guys so much. So to dive into this, the first thing that I really want to get into is talking about what really is home automation to you guys and why people need to pay more attention to it. I think a lot of our community has a surface level understanding, some more than others for sure. But dive into this a little bit more. What's it really all about?
So home automation there's a lot of stuff in our house, not just smart stuff. There's just refrigerators and all that stuff. And all that stuff has data. There's power usage, but there's is the light on? Is the TV on? What are we doing? And all that stuff right now, if you get a lot of the off-the-shelf products, they will take all the data, send it to the cloud, to Google or Amazon, and allows you to control it by voice. But there's so much more that we can do with this data. And actually, if you gather the data yourself with an application like Home Assistant, you can start saying, how much energy do I use? How much energy did I produce? Did I use more than I produced? Maybe you want to turn on the lights when you get home. Maybe you want to get notified when the washing machine is done. Maybe you want to turn off the internet to your kids' tablets when they have to do homework. Maybe there's so many things that you can actually do once you gain the information and the control that's actually available in your house. And that's home automation.
Yeah, I think that's going to be huge for people. So I think that one of the things that when I was reading about it that made me excited is that it's kind of I ordered a Tesla recently, and one of the things that Elon always talks about is how, things like autopilot, it doesn't seem like much, but just not having to put your hands on the wheel and put that concentration is a little more stress that's off your life for a little bit. And I kind of feel like this is a similar concept, that there's lots of little things that we have to constantly have rattling around in our heads. Did I turn the toaster off? Is the oven off? Is this, is my thermostat set correctly? All these little things are in the back of our head. And it seems to me like what home automation is trying to solve is that you only have to think about those problems once, and then you configure your system to control it the way that you want it to, and you don't have to process any thought about it beyond that. Is that a fair summation of that?
Yeah, definitely. I think that, when a lot of people think of home automation, they always think about the Jetsons and having this smart home that is going to predict what you're going to do next and do that steps. But the reality is that we are not doing the same stuff in life every day. Every day is slightly different. Maybe you get up a little bit earlier. Maybe the kids run around slightly different than previously. And so it's a lot about just conveniences that you don't have to think about, right? The turning on the lights when it gets dark in the living room. It's pretty straightforward. You're going to do it every day. You might as well just automate it.
Yeah, I think that's a really good example. So what are some examples specifically that you guys have set up in your own environments? Doug, maybe we start with you.
Well, I have a slightly different perspective on some of the things. For me, what's important is a combination of accessibility, convenience, and comfort, but also data. As Paulus mentioned, there's a lot of data available in our homes, so a lot of my implementations are intended to capture data. So he also mentioned power generation. A good example of this, when you're generating power and you want to make sure you get correct credit for what you're contributing to the grid. without being able to measure this, you've got to take the utility's word for it. Now, not that a utility, of course, is going to step on the little guy. They're going to look out for us. But you want to be able to accurately measure the consumption of power and the generation of power. If you're using your own power generation, maybe you've got some secondary circuits, things that are not important to you, and your power production drops. You want to automatically turn those on, or turn those off. And that's just a predictive thing that you set beforehand. And you say, well, if I'm charging my car and solar drops below this value, stop charging until it returns.
Yeah.
Or until I switch to the grid. Then you've got other considerations. Example, my wife and I have a 2-year-old son. And something that we've really found helpful at night is what's called night mode. It's a function that we have in Shelly products. And during a set period of hours every day, if we turn on a light, that light has a maximum value of 25% brightness. So it's we've also got a transition timer. It takes the course of 5 seconds to fully brighten to that 25% brightness level. This is very gentle on his eyes. It's not likely to wake him up. If I want to walk into his room and check on him at night without waking him, that makes it really soft.
Wow, that's crazy. I think that's awesome, though. Like, just the attention to detail that you can really apply to the various devices in your home, and little granular controls, like even not just on or off, but the brightness level. That's awesome. That's awesome. What about you, Paulus? Do you got any crazy home automation setups yourself? I assume you do.
No, well, I mean, it's not very crazy because the crazy ones never last, right? Like, just if you have, for just an example, like this is one I don't have, but you can have, like, let's say that you want to dim the lights in the living room when somebody starts watching TV. Well, if there's multiple people in the living room and somebody's reading a book, you don't want to dim the lights, maybe, right? So if you get too many false positives where it fires while it shouldn't, you're gonna turn it off. So yeah, no, I have like just simple ones. Like, for example, when I turn on my webcam on my computer, my streaming lights will automatically turn on, so that like I'm lighted in the right way, and like my background lighting will turn on. This is just a simple, like, hey, if my camera is on, send it to Home Assistant, it does the rest. I have like stuff, just turning the lights off automatically at night. A garage door opener, like you can have a notification when you're arriving home on your phone, like, hey, do you want to open the garage door? And it's just a click and it opens up, for example.
Yeah, I think that those are some really common ones that folks will probably want to utilize the most. I don't think that it has to be crazy. I think there's probably people out there that go maybe too far. They just get stuck down that rabbit hole.
Yeah.
What else can I do? But I think the simplest things are probably the ones like controlling your thermostat, knowing your power levels and what you're contributing / consuming. I think that kind of stuff is really good. I want to segue now into the products themselves that hook into everything, because before we started, I had mentioned that I had a really surface level understanding of home automation before this week, and as I dove into it more, I started realizing that the products that you want to utilize with this don't necessarily have to be smart in and of themselves. You could have other devices that sit in between the product you want to make intelligent and either the power outlet or something else, so that you can control them. And that's where Shelly comes in. So Doug, maybe you can kind of explain specifically. Let's start with, what can you monitor and how?
That's actually a pretty big topic. So just to sort of narrow it down, in terms of environmental data, we have battery-operated sensors that can manage temperature, humidity, detect flooding, motion, light, the opening of doors and windows. In terms of power measurement, we've got relays with power measurement capabilities that will work with single wire or one phase AC voltages from 110 to 240 volts. We have power measurement that is compatible with 2-phase, 3-phase. So anything from your home, say, for example, a clothes dryer, which is a 240-volt appliance, up to a 3-phase lighting panel in an office building. And it's all going to work the same way. It's going to provide the same benefits and the same connectivity with different automation platforms, IoT platforms, and so on. It's really nice because you can actually use the same equipment at home that you use in your office, have a seamless experience, and it's compatible with virtually everything.
Wow, that's really cool. And one of the things that I was talking about before, about like appliances that aren't necessarily smart by design, we were talking about this in pre-show, and I thought it was really cool that you can set up something where you have an outlet, one of your adapters that plugs into the wall, and then you plug your washing machine into it, and you measure the power levels of when that washing machine is running, and then when you can tell that the power levels have dropped, you know that the washing machine has stopped, so you can actually have something that notifies you, hey, your clothes are done, which for me, I don't know about you guys. I can't tell you how many times I've thrown my clothes in the laundry, forgot that I put them in wash, and then the next day I'm like, oh, that smells rancid. I got to go wash that again. Be a lot nicer if I just change the loads when they were done. But there's no ding on my phone that tells me that. So is that all stuff that Shelly does too? Like you're monitoring those power levels and reporting back?
Of course. I actually take it a step farther because I don't usually have my phone in my pocket.
Hey, Doug, real quick, your mic is starting to go a little fuzzy.
Oh, my apologies.
There you go. Now you're good. Yeah, go ahead.
So I was going to say that I don't normally have my phone in my pocket or a tablet handy. So what I actually use Amazon Alexa. I send a notification to Alexa, and she announces all over my home the wash is finished. So it doesn't matter where I'm at in the home or where my wife is, we're playing with our son or whatever. Every Amazon Echo, besides the one in the nursery, which we exclude in case he's napping or asleep, it sends the notification.
Wow, that's really cool. That's really cool. And how do you feel like, Shelly, because there's a lot of different technology makers out there that do stuff with home automation. What really separates Shelly in your mind from the alternatives that are out there?
The flexibility, and that comes in two fronts: the ability to work with virtually any voltage, any circuit, as well as the ability to work with virtually any platform. Even premium platforms like Control4 and Elan, there are companies that produce drivers for this and allow professional home installers to use Shelly for special use cases or in areas where another product may not fit. There are a lot of great devices and great manufacturers out there, and there's a big market for smart home. So the more you can work with, the better everyone is.
Totally agree. And I think that
if I can chime in, just what we as Home Assistant like about Shelly, because like we work together, as in they provide our people with products, and we provide their engineers with questions and feedback, and they will update the firmware just to make sure that it integrates well with Home Assistant. And what we like about Shelly is that it's open. So you can actually flash your own firmware. So we have a group of our users that like to run like their own open source firmware. Actually, a lot of the Shelly devices have the headers exposed, so you can like just flash your own stuff. But the thing that's actually really nice is that it works local, right? So there is no cloud necessary. So Home Assistant can talk directly to Shelly devices, and Shelly has an API that notifies Home Assistant when something happens. So the way APIs work, the way data flows, is that either Home Assistant could, like for example, like with certain devices, we have to ask like every 5 seconds, hey, what's your status? What are you monitoring? What is going on? And with Shelly, it actually works the other way around. Shelly will say, hey, Home Assistant, here's an updated data. Like, do with it. And that means that Home Assistant knows the data as soon as possible, which is what we need for home automation, right? Like, the faster we know your laundry machine is done, the faster we can send a notification or speak that through your speakers. Although, of course, I mean, laundry is maybe not a good example. I think motion is, of course, where it really happens, right? Like, if you enter a room and the motion is not fast enough and we don't turn on the light fast enough, you might as well have touched the light button. Yeah. And then, of course, we are no added value.
Yeah, no, that's a really great point, because, that latency really matters a lot when it comes to stuff like this, and I totally get that. And I love the idea of everything being on the local network. One of the things that I always struggled with, this goes back years, so like I have a Ring doorbell. That's probably the smartest thing that I have in my home is my Ring doorbell. And what kind of frustrated me when I got it was that by default, you kind of have to subscribe to their cloud technology. You have to kind of subscribe to this idea of sending the video up to them. There's no other alternative. And what that got me thinking about was, well, man, so I've got a doorbell from Ring, and maybe I've got some other device in some other place, like a Philips smart bulb or whatever. And now you've got all these different interfaces that you have to use in software to control each different platform. And that seems very frustrating to me. If I want to build my home to be smart, really what you have done, Paulus, with Home Assistant is what I want. I want a single control platform for everything. I don't want to have to go into the Ring app for the Ring and go into the Philips app for the light bulbs and go somewhere else for the motion sensor. I don't want that. I want a consolidated place to see everything. And that's where I feel like you guys are really hitting it out of the park.
Yeah, no, definitely. But I think it's also not just that you want to see consolidation of when you open like a single app to control everything, But it's also, if you have different systems, they cannot be automated together. So your Ring doorbell couldn't flash Hue lights unless Ring adds support for Philips Hue.
Right.
Now maybe Philips Hue is super popular and maybe that might happen, but what about like a newer or a smaller firm? Like maybe a Shelly light might not be supported directly by Ring. So you need like a system to control it all to actually be able to turn on lights, for example, to automate across automation ecosystems.
Yeah, and there's something also just intrinsically cool about this stuff. It kind of makes me feel like cyberpunk. Like you kind of buy all these little gadgets and you kind of glue them all together, and they work. Like they really work, and it's not something that I think people are used to anymore. Like I'm a 90s guy. Like I was born in the 80s. I'm a 90s guy. And back then, I remember going and building my own PCs and putting everything together. And like I just remember Windows being kind of a pain in the butt and drivers. But now you get forward, and we're in the era of Apple, right? And everything is just done for you as a service. And there's a lot of positives to that. I'm not going to try to take away from that. But I kind of miss that tinkering and do whatever you want and kind of figure out all the nerd knobs and twist them the way you want. And I feel like this really is like the next place to go do that. If you love tinkering and you want to kind of automate as much as you can, there's really no limit. Like you can literally, anything that takes power, you can probably automate to some extent. So very, very cool.
Yeah.
Now a big question that I've had, and I've kind of figured this out, but I figure we should go over the subject anyway for people who haven't, is how you basically get started. So what would you say are the biggest low-hanging fruit opportunities for people who have nothing in home automation today that are like, hey, I want to get started. I don't want to spend thousands of dollars on equipment. What's the easiest thing that I can do that'll have the biggest impact to my life?
Doug, you want to start?
Sure. And if you've got no experience whatsoever and you want to find out if it's going to help you, if it's going to be a positive impact on your life, start with plugs and bulbs.
Plugs and bulbs, okay.
Because it takes no electrical skill to install these. And you've got a wide range of manufacturers, a lot of different products out there. There's something that's going to fit you. Now, if you want to use something with Home Assistant, I'm going to throw a plug out here and say that, in my opinion, Shelly plugs and bulbs are the best available for you. You don't have to use the Shelly app or our cloud service. They're going to be compatible right out of the box with Home Assistant. You can connect to it with your phone or your laptop or your tablet, set the Wi-Fi password, boom, you're automatically going to be found and compatible with Home Assistant.
Now, Shelly does have an app, I think, right? But you're saying that if you want to use Home Assistant to manage everything and maybe a combination of Shelly and non-Shelly products together, that's the value of what Home Assistant brings in. And the fact that you guys make the technology open is what makes it so easy to integrate, right?
Right. But I will tell you this, I have to also throw another shout out. There's a small group of really talented and dedicated developers, community guys who have developed the Shelly integration for Home Assistant. We didn't do that. The community did that, and it's allowed a lot of people who might not otherwise have been able to install a third-party plugin to use Shelly natively with Home Assistant. And of course, because Paulus has been involved, it's the highest quality possible. He understands the architecture better than anyone because he's the founder. He's the guy who started this.
That's awesome. I actually do have one. I think I might have brought this up on a previous episode of the podcast, but I have one crazy use case that I want to try to set up at some point. So I don't know about you guys, but in our house, we live in a 2-story house, and my daughter's bedroom just does not get proper ventilation. Like the vents in the room, just the furnace that's put in the house, the AC unit in the house, just doesn't have the strength to push the air through the vents the way it needs to. And even if I shut all the returns and everything, there's just not enough pressure to get it in there. And so we're looking into alternative solutions, but the other problem comes in winter. It gets really cold in her room. And what I was thinking about doing was setting up a server in her room with a graphics card in it and using Bitcoin mining to generate heat and then having a temperature sensor in the room, so when the temperature gets to a certain level, it just turns that mining off, and it can turn it on and off based on the temperature. That might be kind of a neat way to both make some money and keep my daughter nice and cozy warm at night. So
it's an interesting idea.
Yeah, I might have to mess around with that. We'll see if my wife will let me put a server in her room. I don't know about that. All right, so I want to shift into Home Assistant more now, because we kind of talked about the big subject of home automation and all the different things you can do with it, which I think there's just gosh, we could spend hours just talking about all the little individual use cases there. But I want to go back to Paulus now. Why create Home Assistant? What problems do you feel that you're solving that these other platforms are not?
So the biggest thing that we're solving is that there wasn't really a platform out there that was focusing on local control and privacy. So there's a lot of systems that are very affordable nowadays. I mean, when we started, those didn't exist. Like, the Google and Amazon, but they send everything to the cloud and they work like silos. Like, you can get all the data into it what you want, but you cannot query it. Like, I want to see a history of when I was using my lights. They won't give it to you. They will use it themselves, but they cannot give it to you. And there were a ton of like proprietary systems that work locally, but they're all very limited. You can't really expand them. And it also means that you always have to buy these hubs from these companies. And it's so unnecessary because like a lot of people have either a server at home, like Unraid, or Synology, whatever stuff. But also Raspberry Pi is like a $35 Linux computer. And, you can use those things. So yeah, I developed a Python application and it actually just runs completely local. There is no cloud necessary to run Home Assistant. Now, of course, if you want to integrate with the Google or Amazon, you will need a cloud because their system doesn't work with like a decentralized system. They need like a single place to talk to. But yeah, if you want to run Home Assistant completely offline, like somewhere like in a cabin in the woods, it will totally work fine.
Yeah, I think that's huge too. Like, it goes back to what we were talking about before about this idea that like with other technologies, they've all kind of built themselves around, we're going to provide a cloud service. And again, the cloud services are okay. Like, I don't want to knock on them too hard, but when you're forced to be reliant upon a server very far from you to do simple things for you, it can introduce other problems. And one is latency, like we talked about. What's the value of turning the lights on if it takes 30 seconds to do it, right? But on the other, it's also about, how much information are you letting kind of leak out of your home and go to these cloud providers that keep it, and then you don't have a way to query it, like you said, which, I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist or anything like that, but at the same time, we should all be a lot more cognizant of how much data about ourselves is really out in the world and how much of that we're just relinquishing control of to companies that we don't have a personal relationship with.
I think that's the thing is that like there's so many times now that you hear that a company got hacked and then they gathered more information than they were actually using, and that information is now available like to hackers, for example. Like,
right.
If you don't have to share the data to begin with, then you cannot even get into this situation, right? Like, if you don't have to trust people, then don't do it.
Totally. I mean, here's a good question too, because you brought up like Alexa and being able to use Alexa, because it sounds like it's not an exclusive thing. It's not like, hey, I can use either Alexa or I can use Home Assistant. You can use them together. They can work together and in concert with one another. But I think what a lot of folks might be concerned about is, okay, let's say I am someone who's really security and privacy conscious, and I don't want gobs of information about me and my habits to just be out on the open web. Is it safe to use something like an Alexa with Home Assistant because it's just being used as a notification pod and it's just telling you when things happen and acting as maybe a control point for taking action? Or where do you draw the line, like for your own self, where do you draw the line between here's how far I'm willing to go with some of these bigger company products and here's where I'm not?
Yeah, so for me, with Home Assistant, you can, Home Assistant gathers control of all these different ecosystems that you have at home or like through the cloud, like cloud service that will pull in. And then you can actually pick exactly what you want to expose to, for example, an Amazon or a Google. So for example, if you don't want Google to know what you're playing on your TV, well, let's not send the TV what it's playing up, but let's only send like the lights that you want to control by voice up, for example. And, I use Google Assistant myself. I think for timers and shopping lists, it's really helpful. Easily controlling the lights. Just when I'm like walking upstairs, it's just like, hey, good night. And then like it turns off everything. But knowing that like, later I can go into Home Assistant, see the logbook, right? And I know exactly what happened. That works for me. I think it's up to every person what they want to do and how far they want to go. And we're actually we're working with Stanford on developing a alternative to Google and Amazon, which is called Almond, and this will be a privacy-focused voice assistant.
Almond
that's
like
something,
the nut?
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's something that right now, I mean, there's already, they've been working on it for quite a while, but they just got like some grants going and some full-time developers working on it. But the idea is that you're going to be able to plug in a USB microphone speaker to like your Home Assistant box, and then it will turn into a voice assistant that you can talk to.
Wow. So, but literally a open source alternative to some of these big box products that we've been seeing. That's actually really cool. Because I mean, like I'm not gonna say that I'm suspicious of Amazon products, but I will say I've had some Alexas that have done some funky stuff. Like we used to have one of them, an Echo Dot, in my daughter's bedroom at night, and she came in one night and came over to me and said, "Dad, can you take it out of the room? It's talking to me." And it's like in the middle of the night, it would just randomly start saying stuff to her. I think it's a defective unit, but still, like, it just rubs me the wrong way. I love the idea of having devices that operate in a silo that don't have to rely on a cloud in order to work. Because, you know, I brought this up on the first episode of our show where I talked about how, like, you know, the internet is a really messy thing, right? There's a lot of stuff between you and where you want to go. And ISPs and data center providers, they've done a really great job of making that seem transparent. But that stuff does come crumbling down sometimes. And especially when we have DDoS attacks or attacks that are targeting like major gateways such as Cloudflare. When Cloudflare goes down, half the internet goes down. So having stuff that operates in a silo away from all that and lives in your home, I think that's huge. So maybe another big thing to talk about is the risks of what using alternatives or allowing that data to go out. Like what's your biggest fear of if you didn't bring Home Assistant to market? What would be your biggest fear about using all of the other home automation technologies that are reliant on it? Is it just availability? Is it security? Is it privacy? Is it all the above?
Well, for me, any product that relies on the cloud, it's always, it needs to be clear how the cloud is being paid for, right? If the only way you can control a device is through the cloud and there is no monthly subscription, then who's paying for this cloud? Who is gonna is this like a pyramid scheme that they keep having to sell more products to cover the cost of like the ongoing cost of the products they sold? Mm-hmm. And so, for example, you mentioned Ring earlier. Well, with Ring, you know, I'm paying a monthly fee, so that's how they're affording their cloud. That's fine. Mm-hmm. But there are also like certain products that you buy and you can control through Google and Amazon, and it's not clear how it's being paid for that cloud. And what if those vendors go bankrupt? Like a lot of startups will put in products in the market that rely on the cloud. Those startups go bankrupt, your product stops working, and you have like a broken box at home, right? Like it works, like the physically it works, but there's just no cloud connection, and so it just doesn't function, right? That is just the thing that even today, even with Home Assistant, like when I buy stuff now, this is like the first thing that comes to my mind is like, which functionality relies on the cloud? How is it being covered, the costs? And how does it impact me if that cloud goes away?
That's really interesting too, because it sounds like there's really like two facets to it, right? So on the one is, if I'm not paying for this, right? The first concern that you just brought up, which is a really obvious one, is how does your business stay afloat? How do you continue to provide this service to me? The other is kind of goes back to something that Tim Cook said from Apple. So a long time ago when Apple and Facebook were butting heads, you know, he said, you know, it's important to understand that when you're not paying for anything, you're the product, right? You go to Facebook and you think, oh, Facebook's the product. No. The users are the product, and they're being sold for advertising purposes. And that's part of, I think, some of the concern that I have about just trusting cloud providers with all of our, what I would call metadata, because they're using that data, and they're using that data to create business partnerships, to leverage purchasing power, to do whatever they need to do to be smarter about how they address the market. And there's nothing necessarily intrinsically wrong about that, except the lack of transparency. And the fact that they're, like you brought up earlier, they're holding all of that metadata in a format that you can't query. And I do have a serious concern about that. Like, and is there no legal, like maybe, I don't know how much we know about U.S. law here. None of us are lawyers, but is there a legal requirement for these companies to have to disclose that data? Like I can't, because they're not a government entity, I can't go say, hey, you have all this data about me, show it to me. Like there's nothing we can do, right?
Well, if you're in Europe, you can, right? The GDPR actually allows you to submit a formal request. You got to like include like a copy of your passport, and you say, hey, like, tell me all the data you hold on me. But in the US, you don't have that right.
What about, so does that extend to anonymized data too? So like, let's say I'm a serial number to some company, right? And they don't hold my name, they don't hold my email address. Can I still get that data because somehow or another that serial number translates back to me, or if it's anonymized?
So, well, I'm not a lawyer, but I think it does, because as long as you get a unique identifier that identifies you in their system, it's an identifiable piece of data. So IP addresses also fall under that data.
Oh, wow. See, that's great for people in Europe, but here in the States, I don't think we have any of that. I don't think we have any right to any of that stuff. So, yeah, I think that the home automation stuff with Home Assistant is going to be better for a lot of our users, especially because I think a lot of users that own their own Unraid server, clearly privacy, security, owning the platform that your data lives on, it's important to those users. And so that obviously would extend to Home Assistant as well.
Right. I mean, it's all about vendor lock-in, right? So if a cloud goes down, it's fine if I can still use that device. If I rely on a cloud that holds like historical data and I cannot access that anymore, well, that sucks, but I can still move on at least with that product. I think that I think that the fear I have with like giving Amazon and Google too much control of things in my house is that once they own too much of an ecosystem, as with every monopoly, they will start pushing their things that are not always in the benefit of the user, but are in the end, the shareholders is the first priority, users is second. Right. And this is just not something I want to, support.
Yeah,
Doug, you look on this.
Yeah, go for it.
Because this is actually something that is of great concern to us. The first thing I'd like to point out is I do have to state, we do provide a free cloud service that is entirely paid for by hardware sales. I would also like to point out that as a European company, we're of course GDPR compliant, and you've got to make a choice when you purchase your products. If your data privacy is important, GDPR should be the ceiling. It should be the floor, not the ceiling. You should only work with companies that are compliant, who maintain the absolute minimum amount of your data as possible. So the way we do it, we actually have a granular approach. I mentioned earlier, you don't even have to use our cloud or our app with the products, so that's fine, and they'll work for you forever. In terms of the data that they collect, you've got the ability through standard protocols to share it with whatever application you want to use it with, to collect and store your data and for control. But also, if we disappear tomorrow, these devices are still going to be fully functional for you. In fact, you could reset them, disconnect them from our cloud, and connect them to whatever you want that will support those platforms. But the consumer has to make an informed choice. They have to take the time to research the products and learn about them. And a lot of companies, they're just not going to tell you, because as you both said, you're the product in a lot of cases.
Mm-hmm. Totally agree. You know what else is kind of neat about like having all of these devices that are disconnected? So like, I love dystopian movies. I love like, the Mad Maxes of the world and stuff like that. And you see this stuff and you watch these movies and there's always these scenes where they're like, scrounging for parts and scraps and they're trying to put something together and make something work. And it's funny because like we watch those movies and we think, oh, that's really cool. You figured that out. But with all of these like really high-end IoT devices, none of it would work. None of it would work because all of it's relying on a cloud that wouldn't exist anymore. But your stuff would. Like I could totally see a dystopian movie where somebody's grabbing all these Shelly products and they get a server spun up from 1990 and they get home out.
No way. He's gonna have Home Assistant Blue. He's gonna have the solar array or
that's right.
Wind in the back of his metal shack. And he's gonna be living on Easy Street.
That's exactly right. I think that's so cool. Now I want to shift again a little bit into the setup of some of this stuff, because it seems like there's some things that are just stupid simple to set up, and then it seems like there's other things where you have to kind of become a little bit of an engineer yourself. So like the washing machine example I talked about earlier, there's not maybe you can tell me if I'm wrong here. I don't think there's like a standard template that says, well, here's exactly how much power you're looking for each washing machine. So you have to kind of figure some of that stuff out on your own, yeah?
Well, that's actually pretty simple though, because you just watch.
True.
You're able to generate all the data you need to tell you. Here's the thing. There's never going to be a one size fits all, because we each have different appliances. We have different choices we've made. There are some people who have accessibility needs, and that's an entirely different topic that we should get into one day, because in my opinion, automation is going to revolutionize the care and comfort of people with physical handicaps.
Oh, for sure. For sure. I mean, that's probably one of the biggest use cases for it right now. Like, I can see those people being earlier adopters than anyone else.
Right. Of course, they may not have the technical skill or the mechanical ability to do these installations.
Right.
And again, unfortunately, one size does not fit all.
So, like, talking about the setup process, though, going back to that for a minute, like, one of the things that I was referring to is kind of like this whole idea of the blueprint code. So, like, you're looking at a blueprint for something. So it seems like you're kind of taking this text document, right, and changing values manually within it. Am I understanding that right?
No. So we have this concept which is actually called Blueprint inside Home Assistant, right? And it's a template, but the template already specifies it's pretty much like, so at the core, automations are written in like our own configuration format, and it's stored in like a YAML document. But in a blueprint, what happens is that you take this YAML document, you say, okay, these parts of this configuration are going to be configurable. So now you have a blueprint and you say, these are the inputs. And these inputs you can specify, well, this input needs to be a wattage that's being used right now. And this input needs to be a device. And this that is a washing machine. And this input needs to be a device that is a mobile phone. And if you then have the blueprint for like notify when the washing machine is done, a user would only have to select the washing machine, the device that needs to get the notification, and then the number of wattage that it needs to have reached before, if it goes down again, it will send a notification. And then that all happens through the user interface. So we've been really working hard in the last 2 years to make sure that a lot of these things are accessible to people, because we realized that, you know, we started out as a Python application. It was very like tech heavy. You need to be like a system administrator to actually automate your home. And we've been working a lot in the last few years just to add more user interface, so that if you want to just like automate your house, then you can actually do that. And you don't actually have to know how to manage a Python virtual environment and these kind of things.
So when you like import a blueprint, for example, there's a nice UI now that then says, here's the values or here's the fields that we need you to input so that we can get this configured for you. That's really great, because I mean, if you're looking at it from the perspective of someone who's like, a lot of our users are savvy enough to have built their own machine, they've got their own server set up, but you know, let's be fair, our OS, even though it's Linux based, we do our best to not expose Linux to the user. We're trying to make the platform as accessible to the widest number of people as possible, and telling someone to go and install Ubuntu or Arch who's not super tech savvy and then install all the apps that you need, that's a real challenge, right? So UI, I can totally see being super important. That's awesome that the way that you guys have been developing things has been more user interface centric, because I do think that's the key to making this easier and easier and easier for people.
Right. Yeah, and for us, that really started like a couple of years ago when we actually created like a subscription model on top of Home Assistant. So Home Assistant itself is free, but you cannot access it remotely when you're away without like opening ports on your router and stuff. And so some people choose not to want to go down the technical route, and then they can like pay $5 a month, and that supports the development of Home Assistant. And with these people, that's who's paying me full time to work on this, and a couple of others too. And with that money, we were able to make it easier, because I always said, when I'm doing this in my spare time, I'm not going to create a UI, because it's just a pain, right? Like this, it's a lot of work to create a good UI. But now that we're working full time, we're just, you know, it's our focus to make it easier, because we want to get, you know, as many people see our work as possible, because it's just, you know, it makes no sense to have all these like brilliant minds build like a piece of software that then is only usable to like
the brilliant minds.
Yeah.
Well, and what's funny is that, I mean, that's even how Unraid started. So like our company, our CEO Tom, he built Unraid really for himself. He built it for himself and his son. His son was a media freak. He sets up high-end home installations, probably does some home automation stuff too. And he said, you know, Dad, there's not a really good storage platform out there that lets you add one disk at a time, that isn't reliant on traditional RAID technology where you have to add these giant disk sets every time you want to expand. And that's kind of where he built it. He built it for himself. And the entire OS was originally had no UI. Everything was just configured over Samba, where you would modify text files, and then the system would refresh and detect the changes and apply it. And it worked, But he knew just as well as you knew that's just not a long-term solution for people. You got to have UI, and it's like even today, we get tons of feature requests for Unraid that come in all the time. Oh, just add this, just add that. And if all we had to do was add the functionality without the UI, it's easy. It's usually very easy. But once you get into the UI and all the edge cases and, well, what if they have this or what if they have that, the challenge just seems to go through the roof. And it's so frustrating, I think, as developers too, to be looking at these problems and say, okay, I can solve the problem. The engineering problem I can solve. Making it so that every user who wants to turn this feature on has a good experience, that's 1,000 times harder than solving the actual problem.
Yeah, no, definitely. And this is exactly what we do in Home Assistant, actually. We build features sometimes that are only accessible through YAML configuration and not actually through the UI just yet. And then maybe a release later when we have the time to polish it out, we will make a subset available. But we will never, we're definitely saying like, listen, some things just edit the text files because we are not going to be able to build the UI for this.
Yeah, we're in the same boat. Like we do that with our VM to some extent. There's certain things that our VM manager doesn't do by default because it just adds too much complexity to the logic code for how the form's going to work and stuff like that. And so we just tell our users, look, you're going to have to manually edit the XML for your VM, add those fields in, and you'll be fine. Long term, our goal is to try to make everything UI driven that is doable and widespread. But there's always going to be like little niche use cases, which would be great if we could make UIs for everything. But it's half the problem is just building it; the other half is supporting it, right? And it's like if we don't use it ourselves, it's really hard for us to continue to maintain support for something. Stuff will just end up breaking. So yeah, I totally get that.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't realize when they ask for a feature request is that we need to maintain this forever. Right? You can't just like go around axing features, and every feature we add adds more complexity to the next feature that we add because every permutation of enabled features has to work together. And it just sometimes you dig yourself a hole, certain features, and they're like, okay, well, I guess we have to just replace everything now with a new feature because it's just too bad.
I totally feel you on that. There are definitely things like that for us that have been that way for a long time. I mean, we were really happy because it's so hard as developers to take something away, right? So if you build something and you give something to a user, it seems like the worst thing in the world to take it away. And thankfully, we actually got away with it I can't remember what release it was, but we deprecated AFP, the Apple File Protocol, because Apple deprecated it. So we had the best reason to do it, and then they switched Time Machine to support SMB, so that was great for us. But it's like it took us so long to get rid of that thing, and we wanted to get rid of it for so long. So we're like, this thing is a pig. It just does not perform the way we want it to. There's so many technical issues, but we had to keep it around because we delivered Time Machine support. And so I totally feel you on that. Yeah. I think that's a challenge for anybody in the software industry.
Yeah, I mean, I still have one of my Unraid disks on Riser FS, right? Like,
oh yeah, yeah. I mean, Riser is one of those things that like we made the change, thankfully, on a go-forward basis, so the default file system's now XFS. But yeah, there's still times where I'll do a support call with a user, and there's a couple of Riser FS disks out there, and I'm like, wow, like that stuff's still kicking around. I mean, and knock on wood, Linux has done a really good job of making all of that legacy technology still just freaking work. But yeah, it's one of those things where if a Riser bug came up tomorrow, man, I don't even know where we would start. We would probably tell the user, hey, look, you're gonna have to run the repair tools, and if that doesn't work, reformat the disk because that's XFS and never touch Riser again. Like it's pretty much the only thing you can do. So now I want to switch subject. I want to talk about future, like looking forward. So clearly there's a ton of stuff you can do with home automation today. Ton of cool products. I'm going to start with Doug. From your perspective, Doug, what's the next big thing? Like I don't need you to disclose products you haven't released yet or give us stuff that's covered under NDA, but maybe as a general subject, what's an area that you guys want to dive into as a company that maybe you're not dealing with today that we should be expecting in the future? Oh, I can't wait till Doug comes back and tells us all about this, whatever this is.
Well, actually, I'm free to tell you about this. We're developing a Pro line of products. As a matter of fact, the very first of our Pro products is coming out next month. It's the second generation of the Shelly 4 Pro, which is a 4 relay controller. It's got an LCD screen. It's DIN rail mountable. It also is second generation device, we've added additional features, an upgraded MCU. It has Ethernet and Bluetooth capability, and this will not be ready for the first release, but it will have a scripting editor built in, which will give you a great deal more flexibility in what you're able to do locally without any other control or device or automation platform. So you can do a number of things. You'd virtually be able to control every Shelly device or any device that controls by REST, that's on your local network. You could set up, some basic scenes, maybe even some really sophisticated ones, and then sort of daisy chain things out. If an event occurs, then you can send something to the next device, which evaluates and sends to the next device, and so on. And once we put these tools into the hands of developers like Paulus and the guys who are working on the Shelly automation integration for Home Assistant, it's going to be a big deal. Now, in addition, the Bluetooth ability to provision the devices is going to be a better consumer experience. It'll be more helpful for pro installers and people using it in engineering applications. So there are a lot of benefits all the way around. And my personal favorite is that the flash is twice as big, whereas now we're bumping up against the limits of flash. So we have a hard time adding new features without refactoring the entire code. We're now going to be able to easily add new features to the firmware of each device.
Oh, that's awesome. That's really awesome. And when do we expect to see some of those devices come into market?
Well, the small first run of the Shelly 4 Pro will be available next month, and the second production run in a few months after.
Nice. Awesome. All right. Well, we got to be definitely paying attention to that. Paul, let's shift to you. So what's the next big thing that you want to work on for Home Assistant?
Well, so I already mentioned it earlier, the voice assistant we're working on, it's going to be really cool. So this is going to be something that, right now it's just only English, but it's, based on it's scientific models developed at Stanford, and it's a neural network, and I think I'm super excited about that. And then Mozilla has been working on open source speech to text and text to speech, and if you combine that with an open source assistant that is mainly about the NLP part, then all of a sudden you can run your whole voice assistant stuff at home, and that's something just I'm super excited about, because that's one of the when people think of home automation nowadays, they think of voice. Even though of course that's just the top of the iceberg, and so I think being able to have a solution there that we can say, well, we know what's going on and we can actually enhance it and do it exactly as we think it should work, I think it'll be awesome. And so I think definitely keep an eye out for Almond, because it's going to be very cool.
And how long do you think until folks, and then how can they support that project? Do you have a Kickstarter for it or something like that, or? No,
so Almond it's driven by Stanford, but we are closely involved with it. And right now, they don't. The best thing is you can actually already install their beta version of the next generation. It's like a Home Assistant add-on. So if you want to do this on Unraid, you have to install the Home Assistant operating system in a virtual machine on Unraid, because then you have add-on access, and add-ons are actually just Docker containers. But this Docker container will automatically integrate very smoothly into Home Assistant once it's installed inside Home Assistant. So I can definitely share some instructions for in the show notes with a link to the wiki so people can get started.
Oh, that'd be great. Yeah, I think folks are definitely going to want to check that out. Very eager to see that voice control platform come out, because, like I said, I have some Alexas in the house. I deal with them. I always just have this weird feeling. And so do my friends when they come over. They're all like, "Is that thing always listening to me? Who's it sending it to?" And the little YouTube videos of, "Hey Alexa, you talking to the FBI?" And she just shuts up. She doesn't say anything. So it bothers me a little bit. I like the idea of buying a device that doesn't require me to subscribe to some kind of cloud service. I love that.
Right. And I'll tell you that for a lot of people, voice assistant is actually a critical technology. Me personally, I've got rheumatoid arthritis, and it's very well controlled, but at one point in my life it wasn't. And before I'd installed a lot of automation controls in my current home and added voice control, there were times when I'd sit in a recliner after dark waiting for my wife to get home from her job, because it was easier to do that and wait than to try to wrestle up and get to the light switch and turn on the light. So if you combine the power and impact on people's lives of a voice assistant with data privacy, because those are the two those are the 2 points where the technology butts heads. Because it's very expensive and intensive in labor and programming resources to develop a voice assistant. And there's got to be some payoff for, a corporation that develops this tool, whether it's Amazon, Google, or Josh AI, or whoever. Privacy is the key. And with open source, that's what you have: data protection, data privacy.
And I think we're going to see a trend. Hopefully, we're going to see a trend of more and more companies going down that open source route. I was impressed with Tesla making all of their patents open source. Like if you rewound the clock and asked any car manufacturer when they were starting up, hey, all that's engine design work, can we just make that open so anyone can use it? They'd laugh you out of the room. But I think it takes, being honest, it takes some balls. It takes some serious balls to say, I'm trusting that we are so good at what we do that I don't need to hide how we're doing it. And if you can do a better job than me, hats off to you. I think that's a really interesting model to operate a business in, and I think it also speaks to great confidence and leadership at companies that do that. So hats off to anybody out there in the open source world, obviously to you too, Paulus, and Doug, also to your guys, because your platforms are incredibly open, which I think is really, really great. All right, so before we wrap up here, are there any other subjects related to home automation that you guys want to cover, things you want to talk about, things you think that are important for our users to know about?
I think if you're listening and you have an Unraid server, which probably otherwise you wouldn't be listening, it's really easy to get started with the Home Assistant core installation, which is available in the Unraid community store. But if you want the full Home Assistant experience, you have to go down the virtual machine route in Unraid, and there's a virtual machine image that you can download from a Home Assistant operating system and run it in Unraid. There's a bunch of YouTube videos tell you how to do it exactly.
Yeah, we'll put some links down in the description of the show so that you guys can check that stuff out. Doug, any final thoughts from you?
Well, I would like to say that, first of all, everybody here at Shelly, we're big fans of Home Assistant and of Paulus. I personally think, in my professional opinion, that Home Assistant has huge potential in the professional home electronics installer market to really take the place of some of the, really high-end custom integration products. What I mean by that is I believe that a small independent installer can take Home Assistant, maybe Home Assistant Blue, which I'm a big fan of, and tuck that under his arm in a box of varying brand components and walk into his customer's home, set everything up, maybe upgrade their Wi-Fi, give them nice stereo setup, and do this at a fraction of the cost of what you'd find from the really big names in the area, but have a very similar experience. And of course, there's great savings for the consumer. There's gains in accessibility. I think everybody wins the more open every product is.
Absolutely.
It gets a lot more people involved.
Yeah, I totally agree. And Shelly products are available globally, or U.S. and Europe, or is there specific areas that you guys don't deliver to? Or
We're available globally. We have offices in Europe, in North America, and in Asia, but we ship globally.
Awesome. Excellent. Well, guys, I really do appreciate you coming on today. I thought this was a really informative episode. I think our community is really going to appreciate all the insights that you've given. I think that I'm going to be spending some time trying to set some of this stuff up on my own. Maybe we have you guys come back and we do kind of a recap after I've had a chance to get this all installed in my own home. I'm going to see if our CEO's son, his name's Jeff Mortensen. Jeff is a brilliant guy, super nice guy, and does incredibly large scale media home installation setups, like kind of control floor types platforms where you control everything through a single thing. I'm curious if he's done anything with home automation or if he's got any experience with you guys, and I think it'd be a really great dynamic to the conversation to bring him in too.
Sure.
So yeah, let's
definitely.
Let's plan on having you guys back, and we'll see how much cool stuff I can set up on my own. I'm really eager because I have so many little things that have annoyed me. Like even like we was talking about my daughter's bedroom getting hot. The office that I'm in right now, we're not that far into summer yet, but I have an air conditioning unit in this office because this room that I'm in it's big enough for me, and it's big enough for my two stations, but 2 machines in here running with the door shut. I mean, it easily gets to 10 to 15 degrees hotter in here than the rest of the house. But if I can have a way to just turn that AC unit on and off based on ambient temperature hooked into Home Assistant, That would be really cool. That would be really cool. Just don't have to touch it anymore or think about it anymore. I really like that idea. So yeah, I'm gonna start playing around and having some fun myself. Awesome. Well, thank you guys again for coming. Really do appreciate it. I'm sure our audience does as well. And we'll see you guys again real soon.
Yeah. Awesome. Talk soon.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, guys.